In the past, we've explored what would happen if SCP-096, an entity that attacks anyone that looks at its face, looks at a mirror. But this makes us wonder what would happen if SCP-173, an entity which is immobilized when observed, does the same, and what would happen if we put something over SCP-173, like a blanket or a tarp. In this SCP Exploration episode, we try to answer these questions. Before we begin, don't forget to subscribe to our channel with notifications on so you don't miss any of our upcoming Exploring SCP videos, and very soon we are exploring more hypothetical scenarios about SCP-173. Also, in this video we will be referring to our SCP-173 origin and SCP-173 creator videos, so definitely make sure to watch them if you haven't already. Firstly, we will explore what would happen if we tried to cover SCP-173 with a tarp or blanket. But in order to answer this question, we will have to quickly explain the statue's abilities and limitations. Like we said in our SCP-173 story video, the statue is a piece of anomalous art that was instructed to kill anyone that isn't looking at it in order to make sure it always receives human attention. And from a document where new SCP-173 containment methods are discussed, we learned that a live stream of the anomaly that is being watched by humans successfully deters the anomaly from moving, and even recordings that are watched at a later date have the same effect. So we see that SCP-173 doesn't care how it is being observed, so long as it receives human attention. Alright, what does this mean for our little experiment? Well, artworks such as paintings that are covered up don't receive our attention, so neither would SCP-173. This means the anomaly would be capable of movement even though people are viewing it, and it would most definitely try to kill anyone nearby. But wouldn't the tarp prevent it from snapping people's necks? And how would it know where it needs to go when its face is covered? Let's address these questions one by one. Firstly, in a document where the video feed of an SCP-173 attack as well as the bodies of the terminated test subjects are analyzed, no evidence of external physical trauma to the aforementioned subjects' necks is found. This, combined with the fact that an entity with SCP-173's appendages couldn't physically manipulate individuals in such a manner, and analysis of the video feed strongly suggests that the statue does not make physical contact with the victims, but instead anomalously breaks their necks when close by. This means that a tarp wouldn't prevent SCP-173 from killing people nearby. So let's move to the second question. How would the anomaly see with its eyes covered? To begin with, the creature is a statue, so it doesn't have real eyes and probably doesn't perceive things in the same way we, humans, do. Secondly, the creature is a piece of anomalous art that was created with the sole purpose of being as deadly as possible, so it is very unlikely having its eyes covered would prevent it from orientating. And lastly, even if it couldn't see anymore, it would probably remove the tarp using anomalous means and continue attacking normally. So in conclusion, covering the statue wouldn't stop it from attacking us and would, in all likelihood, probably make things even worse for us, as immobilizing the entity through observation would be impossible. So we can definitely add this experiment to the long do not attempt list in the SCP Wiki. But let's answer the question you came here for. What would happen if we placed a mirror in front of the famous SCP statue? In order to answer this question, we need to once again take SCP-173's nature into consideration. The creature is an anomalous art piece that was instructed to kill anyone that isn't looking at it in order to make sure it always receives human attention. Placing a mirror in front of it would mean the entity would directly observe itself. But here comes the most important question. Is SCP-173 sentient, and would this self-observation satisfy its need for attention? There are two ways to look at this. The first one is very simple. In our Who Made SCP-173 theory video, we come to the conclusion that the SCP Group of Interest, or Wikuyat, is responsible for the statue's creation. And taking in mind the Group of Interest's goals, the main one being to cause havoc, it is logical to assume they created the statue as a simple weapon that kills all humans that fail to look at it. And as such, a mirror would have no effect on the entity and the statue would simply turn its attention to the D-class that placed the mirror in front of it and wait for an opportune moment to attack. But we need to take something else into account, the statue's nature. As discussed in our What is SCP-173 video, the statue is, in fact, a golem that was brought to life using an elaborate ritual. And if we read the most famous golem stories in literature, we see that despite being made of clay, they are in fact sapient and capable of making decisions. One of the most famous golem stories, the one of Judah creating one from mud, tells us that Judah's golem fell in love and when rejected became a violent monster and went on a murderous rampage. And in the SCP tale Crunch, a tale where SCP-173's thoughts and feelings are described in first person, the statue says it is trapped in its containment chamber where it is left to rot by itself, and that its life has no meaning, as it does nothing but walk and scrape the walls. A bit later in the same tale, the anomaly tells us how on one occasion a person entered its chamber, told it he wanted to die and closed his eyes, but the statue refused to kill him, and instead left him to suffer, just as it does. This means that despite the instructions it received during its creation to kill as many humans as possible, SCP-173 is capable of disobeying and doing something else. So just like our SCP-096 vs. Mirror video, we need to take the emotional aspect of this experiment into account. This would probably be the very first time the statue would see itself after its creation, as nobody in the outside world would survive an encounter with SCP-173, let alone put a mirror in front of it. And if the SCP Foundation does this, they would only do this once. If it immobilizes the entity, then great, SCP-173 is contained forever. If it doesn't work, why would they try again? So this would most likely be the very first time the anomaly would observe itself. Just imagine mirrors and cameras didn't exist, and you never saw your face during your lifetime. Then suddenly someone placed a mirror in front of you and you looked nothing like all other creatures you've seen all your life. This would most definitely make you question your own nature and existence. SCP-173 already does so on a regular basis, as showcased by its nihilistic thoughts in the tale Crunch. So we can expect the statue to go through a small existential crisis when presented with the opportunity to observe itself. The statue would probably remain stationary for a while, engulfed in self-destructive thoughts before it finally remembers the life goal that is hard-coded in its conscience: to kill as many people as it possibly can. SCP-173 would probably be very frustrated at this point, once again having been reminded of its abnormality and lack of freedom, and it would probably eagerly wait for another opportunity to attack the D-Class personnel that conduct the experiment. And let's be real, an organization as dangerous and destructive as our Wikuyat that uses any opportunity it has to cause as much chaos as possible would have probably thought of this exploit and made sure it could never be used to render their creation useless. So in conclusion, when it comes to the SCP-173 and SCP-096 mirror experiments, if it sounds too good to be true, it probably is. The Shy Guy wouldn't kill itself because it is practically indestructible, and the statue wouldn't be contained forever because it is too clever. We need to think of other ways of containing or destroying these SCP anomalies and try to keep them locked up as best as we can in the meantime. This concludes our video on SCP-173 experiments. So what do you think? Would a mirror have any effect on SCP-173? If there are any other SCP videos that you would like us to make, don't hesitate to share them with us in the comments. Please make sure to leave a like if you enjoyed the video, and don't forget to subscribe if you enjoy this type of content, as we have many more interesting, scary SCP videos in our top 5 SCP series, and soon we are exploring more interesting SCP experiments. And as always, we will see you in the next video.